Horus and Chance, Home Reaction, and this is I looked into the Warhammer universe for the first time by channel Necrit. Okay, this is the guy who's first time watching Warhammer universe. Not watching, I guess, read about it or something. I don't know what this channel's about, but he has 740k subscribers. So it's surprising that some big creator like that goes into some other thing like Warhammer for the first time. But yeah, I guess there you go. Alright, I don't know. Look, even though I reacted to Warhammer for now like 1.5 years, I don't know how long it's been. I watched many videos. Even then, I kind of barely know it, right? So I don't know how much he can know it just reading it for the first time. But yeah, it's gonna be. He made a half-an-hour video, so I guess it's gonna be a lot. So let's watch it.
The universe of Warhammer always felt a bit strange to me. Not because of what kind of a universe it is or what kind of stories they are telling, but because this universe has always been present around gaming. And still, it is rare to see people actually talk about it, even though it was always praised for its setting. I myself never got the chance to give this universe a fair shake. But since now I'm on a quest to...
People don't talk about it. As soon as I learn about what the fuck is Warhammer, I just went apeshit over it, right? No other universe I could, my interest got so high with this that I didn't care about anything else, right? I was just like, I was waiting for when I'm going to do the next Warhammer video.
To explore all kinds of new universes. After many years, I decided it is time. It is time for me to fully dive into the universe of Warhammer to see what the fuss is about. So not only will I talk about my first experience with actually digging into the lore, but I will also talk about what this universe is actually about and what it needs in the future to go beyond what it already has. So without further ado, let's go into the grim and the dark. Even though the Warhammer title is often connected to video games, to the surprise of nobody, we should mention that's not where it all began. The Warhammer universe was established by Games Workshop.
All of that. So are video games more famous than anything else Warhammer has? It's even more famous than the tabletop? I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, how many people play tabletop? But everybody fucking plays video game. Every single person, even somebody who's not into that, who's never been into that, is gonna play a video game at this stage. Because they just want something to vent, right? They're tired of all the shit they've done throughout the day. They come home, even if they don't care about video game that much, they will have one console, PlayStation or Xbox something, with a controller, and have one of the simplistic games like Doom, where you just kill things. So Warhammer can be one of those games, so it wouldn't make sense if Warhammer games or video games are more famous than anything else.
Manufacturer who kind of established war gaming. Which of course, many of you know means tabletop war games using painted miniature figures. The first Warhammer tabletop game, called Warhammer Fantasy Battle, dates back to around 1983. This is when the game got its first
combat fantasy role-playing
game. Also means this is when the game got its first pieces of lore. Many years before any of the books or novels came out. This game got all of its story from the rulebooks. Every few pages before you get into the numbers or the rules of how the game is played, you get a short description of who the units are, what they do, and where do they come from. This alone was really clever for marketing. In the 80s and especially in the 90s, stories sold toys. Sure, you could have a doll for girls that would sell, but this doll had a car and a house and a story. So of course, Games Workshop had it all.
Are you fucking saying Warhammer has a story because of Barbie? I would lose my shit. Of course I would. I mean, come on, man, really? I mean, tabletop is a thing. Barbie was a thing, physical thing. Barbie had a story, so why not tabletop pieces would have a story? Is that the case? I hope that's not, man.
Planned out as well. I mean, Warhammer was titled as a role-playing fantasy game. So without an already established setting, you don't really have the fantasy or a role to play. And so they crafted a whole new universe that was inspired by the work of J.R.R. Tolkien. It had humans, it had demons, it had orcs, dwarves and elves. Also lizardmen, vampires and necromancers. The base rulebooks alone actually gave all of these units some decent story. Later,
actually, it pisses me off that everything's kind of centered around Tolkien. It doesn't matter which fantasy it is, it will always go back to Tolkien, even the Elder Scrolls and anything. something will be about Tolkien. Something that has become like dwarves. What are the dwarves in fantasy? Every single person painted the way Tolkien wanted, right? It's like, okay, Tolkien created an awesome universe, but now use your creativity to create other universes using that. You don't have to base everything around that, but I guess it works, who knows. But yeah, see, this is the thing. I love this because the lore thing is really important. I remember playing when I was a kid, when it first came out, Unreal Tournament 2004, right? This time around I was 11, 12, I don't remember exactly. But when it came out, right, I played it, and the only reason I loved it, not because of its, shooting and mechanics, which was awesome already, right, multi-kill, double kill, all that is legendary, obviously, but because of every character's storyline. If you go to team selection page and click on every single person, like Horus, Rock, and all these other people, there's an entire description of their life and who they are, why they are, right? Especially those robot Zen Krieger the team. Zen is the main guy. He's also part of the intro. But if you go through their list, you'll realize the Axon was actually the first one. He was the original. And there's a whole factory stage where there's Axon's body lying around, things like that. It's so awesome because of it. But game doesn't, tell you anything. You have to search for this.
Even expanded upon this by leaving some lore in their magazines. And finally, this led them into the books. Loads and loads
Age of Sigmar.
of books. How many, you ask? Over 150. That also includes novels and novellas, which are shorter than books, but still 150. So I think it's pretty safe to say that Warhammer has a really solid ground for its universe. But even this is unmatched by what...
Probably at a level that even Games Workshop would have to scratch their head sometimes when they come up. Like, I'm surprised that they can keep up with all their own lore. That's the problem with any lore, right? That's what I'm afraid of Elder Scrolls 6. Will they even remember their own fucking lore? Obviously, it's not going to be at the level of Warhammer, but still.
Games Workshop did next. Of course, these days, the base Warhammer fantasy is known as Warhammer Age of Sigmar. This new name came to be in 2015. And the sole reason why they had to rename their base fantasy Warhammer is because in 1987, about 5 years after the release of the base game, they gave their universe a new spin. Riding off of the success of futuristic sci-fi such as Alien or Terminator, the Warhammer universe met its new form. Warhammer 40,000, which turned out to be the best decision Games Workshop ever made. As these days, Warhammer 40k is the biggest tabletop war game in the world. And one...
I guess the Total Warhammer is fantasy, not 40k, right? And it has all these different ice queen and whatever the fuck that is. You can see where the fantasy come from, like all this Lord of the Ring level of things, right? You can feel that. But 40k is fucking dark as dark can be. I guess one day the games were like, fuck it, let's just create everything dark. I don't care if this is the trend for it, if people want it or not. Let's just create everything dark. Grimdark world, there you go.
One thing that helps this a lot is the lore behind the units. You see, the entire time I always thought that Warhammer 40k took place in the future from Age of Sigmar. But apparently that is not the case. The two versions of the game have their own two universes which share the same roots. Which I thought would get weird, but in reality it is all enhancing the characters of the units. For example, the change of setting doesn't really change who orcs are. In the fantasy, they might be silly, bloodthirsty idiots with axes. But in the sci-fi, they are silly, bloodthirsty idiots with guns and axes. In this case, it doesn't really matter which side of the fantasy you feed, because still, it all ultimately underlines the characteristics of orcs, even if they are technically separate. And in the end, the reason why the two universes got separated absolutely makes sense. If Age of Sigmar happened in the past, none of the things that happened there would really matter, because you would always know what's going to happen in the future. It would also lock you out from perhaps killing an important character in Age of Sigmar.
You can create a Dark Ages element to it, so you really don't know what happened in the past, but there was a middle point where there is no information around, and this is where we are at. So you can't really know what happened. But I guess why do that when you can just create two different universes? I guess that's better in that way.
especially since you know that they are also gonna be in 40k. So by separating the two universes, they gave themselves the freedom to go crazy with their stories. And oh boy did they go crazy. I'll be honest, I only delved into the very basics of Age of Sigmar, because the entire time my attention was on Warhammer 40k. What can I say, I'm a sci-fi guy who likes complex stories. And complex stories is exactly what I got.
That's everybody.
Because, again, Games Workshop had everything planned out. In 97, 10 years after 40k was released, Games Workshop founded Black Library.
See, everybody's into complex lore and storyline. Only people who are not haven't been hit with that feeling yet, right? One of the day, if they're lucky, they'll come across a lore, a story that they'll really like, and they'll be into the lore and story time. Everybody who's like, I don't care about Tolkien's, I don't care about anything like Star Wars, I don't care about Warhammer, they've never been hit with the right moment where they can actually feel, where every human has this imagination element to them, which feed into the fiction and fantasy. Only people who are too serious about it, it's like, they don't have time to do that, whatever, but one day they will. That's inhuman.
A publishing studio that would focus on releasing books, audiobooks, novels, and comics. And all of it from Age of Sigmar and 40k, which resulted in a massive explosion of lore for Warhammer. Or at least,
Mechanicus OST. I love
that's what
it.
it looked like from the perspective of the fans. Because in reality, Warhammer always suffered from the exact same thing League is suffering from. If you want to dig into this universe, you have to read or watch videos. You don't learn about anything from simply playing the game. You have to actively look for the stories yourself. And that's not really the best way to present your work. This resulted in the fact that the Warhammer universe is amazing. You constantly hear it mentioned somewhere, but you never learn anything about it, because it is never presented to you. And so...
See, the thing is, if you're doing that for tabletop, you would eventually learn the story. Because if you're going to invest in all these miniatures, you paint it yourself, invest time and, your effort into it, you'll be committed enough to learn the stories, right? Hell, even, I remember playing Elder Scrolls games, right? And I played enough like Oblivion and Skyrim enough and knew enough, read enough book inside them and realized, oh, this is a good story. But that wasn't even like 2% of the story. Then later on, I read a lot of stories in there. I watched lots of channels like Fudge Muppet or whatever that is, right? Watched a lot of channels to really dig into the Elder Scrolls lore and realize the games barely covers it. It's much deeper lore than that. If you get invested into something just fine enough, you will look into the story. If you are, too hasty with it, like I don't care about the story, why do I have to read it? You'll never appreciate the original thing in the first place. You'll never appreciate the tabletop game in the first place.
In order to learn what this universe is about, I had to dig in myself. Which means I immediately ran into the same wall League has. Where do I start? In League's case, every single story is written as if you have no idea what the universe is about. Riot is always careful not to put a piece of lore into their stories without context. Every important bit gets cleverly explained through environmental hints, or through clever exposition, which means that you can literally read any story and you'll be fine. Of course, this is something I know about because I have experience with League's lore. But that doesn't fix the issue of Riot never giving...
League of Legends has a lore? I thought it was like a multiplayer type of game, which mild story maybe. I didn't know it had a lore.
...you a starting point. And unfortunately, Warhammer is dealt with in the exact same way. They never tell you where you should pick up the base lore. But in their case, it makes sense why. The base assumption is that you're gonna read the rulebooks. Because the chances are, if you wanna get involved in the lore, you probably like the game. And it is there in the rulebooks where you get the fundamental info. All the maps and the talks about gods and demons are there. The books still give you some context in the same way League does.
I think you should start there, Tau Empire. That's where everything's at.
The base universe are often found in the rules. And after I learned about that, I was able to dig deeper. Which means, for context, I think it's time for me to summarize what this universe is about. This universe is called the Grimdark, and that's for a reason. There is absolutely no good in this universe. Everyone is a bad guy. If you have no idea what this universe is about, you are most likely gonna see a space marine, which could make you think, oh, that's the hero of the story.
Yeah,
this is the good guy. Nope, this universe is all about a massive galactic war of...
I think the first video of Warhammer I watched was from Bricky, right? I'm pretty sure it was the Bricky, not the Lutin one, but Bricky's video was the first. And I remember saying like, who's the good guy here? Is this space marine? Everybody overwhelmingly said in the comments, there's no such thing as good guys.
races. And humans are the most xenophobic of them all. Humans actually want to annihilate every other species or religion in the entire...
Are humans more xenophobic than the Eldar? Really? Craft-roll Eldars, aren't they more xenophobic than, I don't know.
galaxy, so that humanity has no competition. One could argue that humanity is the most villainous of them all. So they are the good guys, but only in human eyes because they are protecting each other. At least sometimes. And that's only until they sacrifice each other to a god which they had never even seen. Anyway, the lore of Warhammer...
If you put on past 2000 years of history of the world and every country, who would you say is the good country? Which country would you put up like this? These are the good guy of the world. That's the same thing with Warhammer. You will never come across a singular good guy, or even if you'll come across... It's survival in the end, right? People having their own ideologies and ideas of how to approach and how to survive, whether offensive or defensive, and that's the history. That's the case with Warhammer.
Starts with a timeline, where you can see different historical events that lead up to the 41st millennium. Which, by the way, that's why it's called Warhammer 40k. On this timeline, you can read about how humans left Earth, how they started colonizing surrounding planets, how they discovered the strange magical realm called the Warp, or how they discovered that the galaxy also has other races. All of this is some really cool world building, especially the parts that explain how humans actually colonize the worlds, how they can build pretty much anything from any material to colonize any planet, or how they crafted artificial intelligence which eventually revolted against them, which made the use of AI forbidden in the future. This is actually a really cool setup for a twist that happens later. But the real story of this universe begins with the Emperor. Long story short, once upon a time there was the Emperor, a giant powerful human who only ever wanted to...
Once upon a time there was an Emperor. he's still alive in M41. I mean, he's barely alive, but he's still alive. He's not dead.
Help humans spread across the stars. He was also a scientist on the side.
He started
kidnapping toddlers and he started genetically reprogramming them into his own bodyguards. Then he did it some more to create an entire legion of his golden warriors. But later he created 20 other superhumans called the Primarchs. These Primarchs became the leaders of different human legions. You know how the different minis you buy can be painted in any color you want? We'll talk about that in just a moment. Anyway, the Primarchs with their legions scattered across the stars, and they started colonizing different corners of the galaxy. Until an event called the Horus heresy happened. This is when one of the Primarchs, called Horus, got tempted by the Chaos Gods. The Chaos Gods are the big evil of this universe. Or at least,
are they?
They are more evil than the rest of the universe. And they all live in a place called the Warp. The Warp serves as a sort of a magical realm.
Are Chaos Gods evil, or they're literally just representation of lots of different things? Khan's supposed to be war. Is he really evil? He just wants blood, skull and war. But that's because war was there in the first place. That manifested into Khan, right? Same thing with Nurgle. Disease and pestilence eventually bred him, and that's what he is, right? So, are they really evil, or are they just what it is, right? Representation of what they are, basically. I don't know.
That mortals...
It's like saying fire is evil. Is fire evil? Fire burns things, right? Fire causes, uh, lots of issues, right? We saw lots of this Australian video, right, where there was like everything was burning, but there was a fire, tornadoes, and things. Is fire evil? No, fire is just fire.
Into. This is where the wizards and warlocks of Warhammer get their power from. Although in this universe they are called psykers, because they tap into this realm using their minds. And as a dark universe would have it, because the mortals of pretty much any race use their minds to reach inside, their emotions started tainting the warp. And it is suggested that these raw emotions formed into the four Chaos Gods. Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways, Nurgle, the Plague Lord, Crone, the Blood God, and Slaanesh, the Dark Prince. Of course, because these gods came to be from mortal emotions. Just like in many other fantasy universes, they also gain their power from worship. Which also technically means they can be fought with pure strength of will. Which is why, when fighting these Chaos Gods, the stories often lean into faith and religions. Even though real gods are not really a thing in this universe. Which yet again gives you more dark twists for the universe of
Okay, again, like I said in many other videos, what is your definition of God? If you mean by God as one singular entity who's all-knowing and created everything, maybe that doesn't exist in this universe. But if God means just, powerful being residing in a heaven or anything magical place like warp where everything goes to, and these creatures have real power in the physical world and whatever, aren't these chaos gods themselves, right? Orcs have their own gods, right?
grimdark. What I find really cool about these Chaos Gods is the way they all manifested. Some came before the others. Obviously Khorne, the Blood God, manifested from pure rage, but Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways, manifested from hope. Which you would think is a good emotion, until you realize that hope is the gateway to fate, and Tzeentch gives his followers the magic of the warp to alter their fate. Next, unlike what you would expect, Nurgle, the Plague Lord, is the manifestation of fear and despair. All mortals tend to fear death. That's why Nurgle is so powerful. And the way he helps his followers is equally twisted. He spreads his disease, which burns and decays bodies from the inside, which helps people reach the natural state of decay before death, while never actually ending their lives. Surely that's a small price to pay for immortality. And lastly, Slaanesh, the Dark Prince, is the
Is it? People argue like immortality is so important, but there, I guess there will be many instances where people will tell you that if someone is, really in torturous state, right? Every single second is hell. And they're going to be like that without a cure. They'll tell you, immediately that immortality is not a good thing. So if Nurgle gives disease and pestilence and pain and horrible life all around, is immortality good at that point?
Manifestation of pleasure. Be it pleasure from pain, sensation, or really anything you can think of. What's interesting is that I learned about all of this before even having to pick up a book. And already the depth of this lore made me really impressed. So when it comes to the Foundation lore, my god, Warhammer is awesome. Anyway, here is
I guess the most of the books would be the events that happened, and you're supposed as Warhammer history, I guess. Like this happened, this guy did this, Orcs did this, Eldars did this, Necrons did this. That's why the books are so many. Like fundamentals, you can understand it, but actual history, like what happened in Warhammer, that's why the books get bigger and bigger.
How it all ties to the main story. Naturally, these four Chaos Gods started battling for the influence over the warp. And since their powers come from mortals using the warp, they started convincing every psyker into drawing power from the warp and possibly summoning things into the physical reality, so that the gods could directly bring more followers onto their side. But here's the thing, after the Emperor was done with his business of kidnapping toddlers and creating his own genetic legions, when it came to creating his 20 Primarch sons, He did so by stealing a bit of magical power from the warp, which serves as a bit of foreshadowing. More importantly, the Emperor still had some work to do to help humanity spread across the stars. And so he needed to leave for some time. And to make everyone stay in line, he left his favorite Primarch son, Horus, in charge of all the other.
So Emperor went out to the market to buy something, put the elder son in charge of it. When he came back, everything was up to shit. And elder son actually tried to stab him. That's what happened there. I'm gonna go outside. I'm gonna put you in charge. Don't fuck things up. And by the way, don't even think about the warp.
Primarchs. However, since every Primarch had their own legion, and they all had their own opinions on the Emperor, where some saw him as a tyrant and others saw him as a god, inevitably they disagreed whether Horus was the right one to lead them. But at that point, Horus didn't care. You see, since all the Primarchs were already linked to the warp, it wasn't too difficult for the Chaos Gods to taint the minds of some of them. So Horus, together with other 8 Primarchs, decided to side with the Chaos, arguing that the Emperor had abandoned them, and they started a war against the other Primarchs who defended the Emperor. This is how the Primarch Civil War started, which is also called the Horus heresy. Apparently, there is about 60 books.
Basically, that was just a power grab, right? You see throughout the history of how certain emperor, certain king died without an heir, and there's a vacuum, power grab happens, lots of killing, and God knows what. That's kind of what the Horus heresy is, right? Emperor went away, right? People got corrupted. All these primarchs that are like, emperor's gone, he has abandoned us, and the infighting inside.
About this civil war. So here's what happened. Horus sieged the Emperor's throne. The Emperor killed him, but got mortally wounded during the battle. Here. I saved you 8,000 pages. But here's where the darkest thing happens. While the Emperor was about to die, the Primarchs figured out they can plug him into a life support machine on the Golden Throne. And every day, if they feed him 1,000 souls, the Emperor would stay alive. Like, yeah, after the millennia, he's not gonna look so bright, but he's gonna be alive. And so that's what's happening in the story now. The Emperor is still technically alive, worshipped as a god, but he can only stay alive with human sacrifices. After that, the Chaos Primarchs retreated to a big chunk of space tainted by the warp, and the good Primarchs keep defending humanity, which means most of them died killing aliens. And this resulted in one last important twist. Without their big Primarch leaders, the different legions were too hard to control. And so, the different legions were split into smaller groups called chapters. This is where the main lore ends. But this is also where the absolute genius of Games Workshop begins.
Yeah, so all the Primarchs were dead. So it all went down to basically Imperium bureaucratic crap, right? People was like, oh, that's it. Split down to smaller units, part of the army now. There you go. I think, after Gilliman came back, I think things gonna change somewhat, right? Moving forward, but still.
The tabletop wargame Warhammer 40k is all about buying really expensive miniatures and painting them whatever way you like. And you can do that because canonically there are thousands of different unknown chapters, which all got separated from the original legions. So all of what I just explained is just one massive piece of lore that justifies the fact that you can paint your army pink and be absolutely serious about it. It is a role-playing game after all, so this game is giving players the freedom of expression. And the lore of the Emperor is what gives them that freedom. From personal experience...
Unlike Imperium, this game actually gives you freedom of expression. Alright. Seriously, man. And, this miniature is really interesting. Like, some of them cost fine, but others cost really, really high, and people actually buy them as collectible. That's some next level shit, right? I don't know. What is the costliest miniature that you can buy? Like, how much that cost really? Because this is really, a heavy thing. And why does that cost from GW that much? Or since they made it so small, people are selling it that high? What's happening?
Many people may not know this, but I did paint some minis in the past. Back then I saw some people on the internet doing it and I thought it could be fun. And so I actually painted my minis in different ways. Of course I didn't know how to play the game, I still don't, by the way. I just did it because I liked the idea of customizing my miniatures, let alone the fact that I don't have friends to play with. But I painted whatever I wanted in whatever way I wanted. And I loved the idea that everything worked. So when it comes to connecting their game to their lore, they nailed it. Except for one little fact. Besides the lore of humanity, the rest of the universe got kinda left in the dust. Like, this universe also has the Orcs, and the Eldar, and the Tyranids, and the Necrons, and the Tau.
They have the
but
fine
most
lore,
of
don't
them
they?
get very little lore compared to the main storyline. And that's because the overall Warhammer universe is kinda split into two halves. On one side you have the Chaos and the Emperor storyline, and on the other side you have the Xenos storyline of ancient deities creating alien species.
I guess the Horus heresy kind of dominated the scene. Chaos corrupting legions and Imperium fighting inside, and that kind of consequences of that also became too big. So that kind of can be his own thing. Like Horus heresy element, altered history and everything is just big chunk of it, and everyone else have their own history, like creation of Slanesh and how Eldars turn out, Drukari's Craftwa Eldar, that's their own thing, Necros and their origin story. But yeah, I guess you are supposed to focus on Imperium, even though there are no good guys or bad guys. I guess Imperium is the protagonist in a way, the whole Imperium. Like that's no one particular person, but the whole Imperium is supposed to be your point of view. They could expand the Xenos in the future, of course, but yeah, I hope they do, right? Because most people apparently, if they get too deep into it, they start to hate Imperium and cares about Xenos more, right? Like Necrons and Orcs.
And since this is where all the other races are, of course, each of them got a smaller piece of the overall story. With that said, sometimes even a smaller storyline can get grim and dark. Orcs are all about dominating by war. All they really care about is who they can raid and
they are the
what
most
they
wholesome,
loot.
apparently.
In a way, they serve as a bit of a comedic relief. For example, the Orcs use an organism called squigs for everything. They eat it, they raise it into beasts, they wear it as hair.
So like
yes,
horse.
Orcs' hair is actually a leech on their head. In fact, they can modify the squigs to be any length and color they like. So when they approach humans, they always wonder why their hair is not as creative. On the other side, you also have the Necrons.
To
The
be shitting me.
actually do have...
Is this true? Is this hair thing true? Oh, that's so orc thing.
On the other side, you also have the Necrons. The Necrons actually do have quite a bit of their own lore. But long story short, their people were dying. And so they seeked out ancient beings called Catan who held the key to immortality. These ancient beings did agree to make them immortal, which was achieved by literally ripping flesh off of them, replacing it with metal and feeding the flesh to the Catan, after which the Necrons became enslaved. Pretty cool story. So of course the...
Not just cool story, it could be the origin story, because I love one of the thing, like where did Emperor come from? I like the old ones theory. Like Emperor is probably one of the old ones, right? Catan's in the old ones, one of the surviving old ones is the Emperor, because it makes sense how he was there since the beginning of humans, right? How he's like a scientist, he's like everything. He basically is everything, he can do everything. Makes sense if he's one of the gods, the old ones.
The Necrons rebelled and they entombed the Catan inside their machines, enslaving them in return. Fun fact, in the Necron culture, apparently there is a play that reenacts these events. And because Necrons don't have to sleep or eat, that play lasts 30 years. Feels like the last time I was in a theater. Also, the ticket prices had to be ridiculous. There are many more stories in this universe just like this, with a lot of them being a lot darker. So let me give you two very quick examples. One subsection of humanity are the Adeptus Mechanicus, who worship technology, and who believe the Emperor is a reincarnation of their technical god. The reason why they
Okay, what did he just wrote that? Thank you, out of what?
got darker. So let me give you two
Ah,
very quick examples.
focus shifted from his face.
One
Okay.
subsection of humanity are the Adeptus Mechanicus, who
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, newer cameras kind of good at autofocus, I think. Okay, there you go. Whoa. Whoa.
worship technology, and who believe the Emperor is a reincarnation of their technical god. The reason why they look like horrifying abominations of humans and machines is because, remember, AI is forbidden. And so, every computer has to have human core. The CPU always has to be someone's brain. So, no matter how close you wanna get to a pure machine, you always find disgusting human tissue dangling everywhere. And lastly, in a different corner of space, there was a school for orphaned kids, where the kids were being turned into ruthless killers, be it Sisters of Battle or even Imperial Assassins. One year, a class of children revolted
You
against
can't compare Imperial Assassins with Sororitas, Sisters of Battle, right? Because those four versions of Assassins, one of them is just too fucked up for even Warhammer 40k, right? How they are, constantly in pain or whatever the shit that was. They're like walking bombs in a way. That's just completely horrible.
the teachers. And as a result, the entire class was buried alive in a horrifying way. They poured cement over the kids, and when it hardened, they were used as the foundation of the walls for the school. And apparently, to this day, people can see the bones of their hands sticking out of the walls, serving as a pretty horrifying warning to disobedience.
What?
This universe has so many of these stories, and unfortunately there is no way for me to cover them all. I mean, look at Bricky, he has 2-hour-long videos explaining the basics of all the races. 3 videos. And I promised my videos won't be 50 minutes long, so it's time to wrap it up. What's my take from all of this? I went into this knowing absolutely nothing about this universe. And after researching the basics of this world, I was blown away by the level of detail behind all the characters, and how every story had its own little place, but together it all formed one giant universe. One could say it is rivaling League, but that's not surprising. Among the leaders of League's narrative,
Rivaling League? What? Warhammer is one of the oldest lore there is. Isn't that bigger than anything else? Like, League of Legends lore is so big that it's rivaling Warhammer? Where'd that come from? How the fuck I don't know about it? This is the surprising thing for me. League of Legends, I just thought it's just a game with a multiplayer shit. I mean, yeah, I know there was a Netflix show, right? But I just like it, the game became too big, they made a show about it. It has a fucking lore?
we have Graham McNeil, Laurie Golding, or Anthony Reynolds. Many of you may not know this, but these guys wrote a lot of lore for the Warhammer universe. In fact, I remember that when it was announced that the Warhammer writers would be working on League, it was a really big deal. And some of these guys worked on the fundamental lore, such as Horus heresy. And in fact, we know that Tryndamere, the co-founder of Riot Games, is a big fan of Warhammer. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's how they got to work on League. This would also explain why all the stories are structured similarly to League, where it doesn't matter what stories you read first. Unfortunately, I only very briefly dove into some of the main books. For context, I never really got into more than a quarter of them, but I did look for some alternatives. Besides just going through the rulebooks, of which I have 2. The one about the Adeptus Mechanicus and the other one about the Nurgle Wars. I also decided to pick up some comics. And oh god, are these good. The stories themselves are really good, but in the middle of the comic, you always get some really chunky pieces of fundamental lore. For example, the Calgar comic actually shows you how Marines are made. However, this kinda leads into a problem Warhammer currently has. It seems like the only way to get into this world is through books. And unfortunately, these days, that's not the best way to do it. League kinda got into a similar trap. Yes, I still believe that League's universe is the best fantasy universe out there, but it was achieved through walls and walls of text. Because
Okay, is he saying that because he's biased, he's been a League of Legends guy apparently? Or is that really true? Because now I'm like, maybe I should watch some videos about League of Legends if it's that good. I mean, it's similar to Warhammer at length and scope, like what the fuck?
League as a game can't show you any lore on its own, which is not gonna get new people hooked in. This is why Riot started Riot Forge, where they are making indie video games using League's IP specifically to tell new stories. It is a vastly superior way to let people engage with the stories. And funnily enough, Warhammer is doing the exact same thing. The game itself doesn't push the lore forward, so they rely on books. But books only give more food to the people already interested in the universe. They don't bring in new people. Although, I have to mention, about a year ago, the popularity of 40k raised a bit because apparently after 30 years, the story moved forward for the first time. And they pushed the hype forward with the release of new minis. After which, it all kinda died down again. I believe this is why we can see so many attempts at a good 40k video game. And I honestly believe they are making the right call. Imagine if Warhammer actually got a massive hit video game. It would be turned from just a universe that serves as the setting for other products into a video game franchise that can power up itself.
I think they should think about a TV show. Because, what was that? I think it was Cyberpunk? I think it was Cyberpunk. CD Projekt Red, Cyberpunk? I don't know. Cyberpunk had a TV show, right? A short TV show or something? I don't know. There was something like that. And that boosted their overall thing that they were making more and more money later on. I think it was Cyberpunk, right? Yeah, it's Cyberpunk. And that's why League of Legends, I think, created one of the Netflix show. Forgot the name of that, but I think TV, that's why Fallout show is going to be a big thing. Even if it doesn't do well, it's going to boost Fallout purchases all around, because apparently people can watch TV show of all the media. Movies/TV shows as the biggest media of the world. So if you can do that, that will put more eyes in anything than any other thing you try, like video games or anything. So TV shows are the way to go, if not movie. So Warhammer need to think about making a deal with Prime or Netflix or something to. I mean, Warhammer is famous enough that Netflix would be like, okay, you know what, we can make this, we can do this. So there are three big contenders: Netflix, Prime, or I guess Disney Hotstar. No, Disney. Yeah, Disney. Disney. What's called Disney Plus? What is it called?
That would be the ultimate dream scenario. And in the past, Games Workshop got fairly close. When I was younger, I remember the first time I ever engaged with this universe
Game
was
of
by
the Year
playing
edition.
Dawn of War. But it wasn't enough to sell me on the universe. Then there was the Total War series, the Space Marine game, which was a really good action game, which is getting a sequel. There is also their mobile game, which I don't really know what to think
Mechanicus.
of, except it actually looks decent. They got a bunch of turn-based games, there is a retro shooter coming out, there is even an indie-styled platformer about orcs, and one of the recent titles that showed a lot of promise was Darktide, a squad-based shooter which unfortunately screwed up its own progression system.
Even this latest season of South Park, right? They're talking about playing Darktide. I guess that should help. People are gonna Google, what the fuck are they talking? What's Darktide game? And they would come up with Warhammer Darktide. So that's a good thing, I guess.
Which is a shame, because from what I've heard, the setting and the gameplay are both really good. At least, that's when it doesn't crash on PC. So as you can see, we are constantly getting more and more Warhammer video games that are trying to break the Warhammer curse. It's good video games, but nothing really broke through yet. And that's honestly great to see. So, after delving into the Warhammer 40k universe...
Yeah, see, the thing is, Warhammer's biggest strength is his lore. All the game is basically shooter-based. If they create something like Fallout or Elder Scrolls, lore-based, open-world style, massive game, and I mean massive, If they put, I guess that requires a lot of money to make it. People don't realize that, but if you want to make a big lore-based open world game, that will require a lot, fuck ton of money. So if they invest that much money into a proper game, hire certain people who knows how to do that, I guess give something to Bethesda or somebody like, I don't know, some big players like that, and hire a good writers and create a story for the games with the lore, that would be a massive thing. That would be a hit. Because it doesn't matter how much people say, oh, I'm done with open world. No, open world RPG done well is the biggest thing there is. If you can do that, you'll be an instant hit.
Universe for the first time, I found something amazing. Also something very grim and very dark, with a level of detail and world building that rivals the other masterpieces out there. Which kinda makes me wonder, if they are so careful to give every piece of this universe its own lore, what's the story behind Blood Bowl?
What? Alright. I don't believe the League of Legends can be bigger than Warhammer, since Warhammer is ridiculously big, but I don't know. I guess I'll have to check it out. Somebody comment down, post a link or something with a similar video like Bricky made about League of Legends. Did Bricky made a League of Legends videos explaining that? I have to check that out. But yeah, somebody comment down a really good video that, touches on how League of Legends lore is, how Bricky does it. Because that would be surprising. I didn't know that League of Legends is that good. Alright people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.